This conference will now be
Great.
recorded.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is Julia Koch from the FLENJ board, and I'm thrilled to be here with Dr. Ashley Warren, who is our New Jersey Teacher of the Year. Ashley, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Definitely. And thank you especially for joining us from your house, like on camera.
Of course.
Love it. Okay. So, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, like how long you've been teaching and why you became a world language educator?
Ooh, sure. So this is my 10th year teaching. I taught fourth and fifth grade for 2.5 years, Spanish, in a FLES program in the elementary level. I taught 7 years of high school at West Windsor Plainsboro High School North. I taught everything from Spanish 1 to AP Spanish Literature and Culture. And then last year, my district piloted a dual language immersion program in Spanish and Mandarin. And the pilot was a success, and they renewed it, and they needed someone to go down and teach kindergarten in Spanish. And I am certified in elementary, and so I left AP Spanish Literature and Culture. I left my 12th graders to head down to kindergarten and teach kindergarten all day in Spanish.
Wow, what has that transition been like?
Oh, wow, yeah. I mean, it's like having a brand new job. I've taught lots of different levels in the high school. And so obviously teaching your novice mid or your novice high is way different than teaching your advanced low or your advanced mid. Every language educator knows that. But teaching 18-year-olds to teaching 5-year-olds was a really big stretch for me. It still is. There are still times that I teach something and they all look at me and I'm like, oh, wait, you don't know how to tie your shoes yet? Oh, or, oh, right, you can't read yet. Hold on, wait, let me fix this. And let me add visuals and so it's really stretched me as an educator. But I went into this, I mean, I know you had said like what made you become a world language educator or what brought you to this profession. And I fell in love with the Spanish language and Spanish speaking cultures when I was younger. And in college, I was majoring in Spanish. And one of my sociology professors that I worked for, he talked to us a lot about vocation and calling and how your vocation or your calling is where your passions, what you love to do, and then what you're good at and what the world needs you to do kind of collide. And I started to realize like, wow, I love people. I love teenagers. I love young adults. I love kids. I love learning Spanish and growing as a Spanish speaker. And there's a need for it in the world. And so I just kind of saw those all collide and realized that that was my calling. And so that's what I pursued.
That is so cool. I love that word vocation, like especially within the context of education. I know that for some people it's really relegated to that like spiritual realm because it's used for a lot of people, but it's just, it feels so relevant to what we do. Like I have yet to meet an educator that was like, well, just kind of fell into it. Like it just happened. Like
I do it for the great pay and for the fame. Like, no, you do it because you're called to it, because you have a gift for it and because you love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's so cool. I'm so excited to like continue to hear your experiences with the little guys because that to me, like I've only ever taught, like I spent 1 year in middle school and I've been in high school and I just imagine that they're like puppies, like what are we learning today, Senora? Like,
yeah,
I'm so excited and like without the jadedness, like it just must be, I mean, I'm sure it's crazy, but it must be so fun too.
That is a joy, that just pure emotion. But it also is hard because I think when I taught high school, if they were bored or not engaged, you'd read the room and you'd be like, oh, they're all on their phones, they're not engaged, right? 5-year-olds, they just tell you, they just raise their hand and say, this is boring, or I don't get it, and it just throws you. Like you've been teaching for 10 years, and you're like, oh, like this is good comprehensible input, and look, I've designed it so that it's scaffolded and they could totally do it. And they're just 5, so they just tell you like, I don't like this. This isn't fun.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Sometimes schools and just gotta do it. Okay. 5-year-olds, no. It always has to be fun.
That's gotta be like, I imagine that must stretch you as an educator because like they're not just gonna go with you and like do the thing because you told them to. They're like, nope, I'm out. We're not.
Nope, I'm gonna tell you.
Yeah.
But it does make you laugh. Like it's a whole new level of joy to the profession. And yeah,
so cool. Yeah. So if I were to, now keeping in mind that you teach the little guys, if I were to ask your students to describe your class, what do you think they'd say, or what do you hope they'd say, depending on the day?
Oh, well, what I hope they'd say and what they would say are probably different. So I guess I can
Okay.
answer both. Actually, right before we went out for school closures, I got observed, and one of the observers wrote, "Your classroom is very loud." And I took that as a compliment because that means that kids are engaging in the target language, they're talking to each other, and interaction breeds learning, right? So I take it as a good thing, but I think they meant it as like, your classroom's really loud. So I think the kids would say that too, that we're really loud. There are 25 in both sections. I have an AM kindergarten class, and it's a half-day program. There's 25 in the AM and in the PM.
Okay.
What I would say is it's just full of joy. It's full of excitement. It's full of choice. You look around the room, and I have my future architects who are building a really long tower and definitely precariously perching blocks on top of things that shouldn't, but you just go with it because you're like, oh my goodness, you're a future engineer. Like, this is amazing.
Right.
And then I have my artists and I have my chefs, and everybody's kind of in their nook doing choice time and engaging, and it's a beautiful mix right now. So I speak only in the target language, as does the instructional assistant. We only speak Spanish. It's 2.5 hours, a half-day program. But the kids are, they're not heritage speakers. I have 3 out of the 50 that are heritage speakers. So, their primary language is not Spanish. And so you hear a beautiful mix of, but I was using the tomate for my plato that I was making. I was using the tomato for the dish that I was making. And so they're like, but he took the verde marcador, which it should be marcador verde, but they're just, they're adorable mixing, he took my green marker. And so it's loud, it's full of joy, it's full of choice. It's just a fun place to be.
Oh, that's so cool. Just like, this to me just solidifies why like we as educators need to continue to push for dual language immersion, because just to hear your stories about that, it's so like when you can get kids to access the language before those inhibitions start to really kick in, they just use it in a way that serves them, which is completely different.
They don't have to ask you, am I spelling this right? Am I pronouncing it right? They don't care. It's just so that they can make meaning. Like, they will sometimes whisper to each other, like, I think she speaks English. Like, they still definitely are confused about the fact that English is my primary language, because they don't ever hear me speak it. But they interact with me with their cobbled together Spanish, and it's beautiful. And even teenagers, I taught Spanish 1, I taught 7 years of Spanish 1. And at 14, 15 years old, they'll stop and say, but if it's plural, I'm like, no, just try, just produce, right? Like, make it make sense, and then I'll help you, I'll give you feedback, but try. 5-year-olds,
they're already there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. I'm so glad we got to do this, Ashley. I'm learning so much from you. So what does culture look like in your classes, and like interculturality, especially because your kids are like basically absorbing 2 cultures at once because they're so young? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's really fun. And I think about my whole career teaching, my 10 years, and how I've approached culture differently at different times, depending on the proficiency level of the class, right? Because you can delve into like the practices and products and perspectives in an intermediate or an advanced level class at a much greater depth and with much more like meatiness to the conversation than you can in a class with 5-year-olds, right. Or even at your Spanish 1 level, because I always, we want to be using authentic resources so that kids are getting access at any level to a real cultural product that contains perspectives and practices of the target culture. But those conversations look different at different levels. So in my class right now, which is a kindergarten classroom, there was a lot of joy around Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos. My instructional assistant was born and raised in Mexico, and so she showed us her family's altar, the ofrenda that they build, and a lot of the kids have seen the movie Koch, and so there was like a connection there. I teach kindergarten, so we say there was a connection. we teach it totally in the target language. And I mean, there are a lot of really heavy ideas associated with day to day. You know, most kindergarten teachers shy away from the idea of death to begin with, right? Like we don't want to talk about people dying, people being dead. And then there's the whole like, oh, like it's kind of hard to talk about religion sometimes with students, right? To talk about like beliefs about where people go when they die. And so it was a bit of a challenge, but it was beautiful to see how much the kids understood with all of it presented in the target language. And I just folded it into my morning meetings and to our social studies curriculum. And I had a mom write to me, and she sent me a picture, and I burst into tears reading it. The mom said that her mother, so the little girl's grandma, had died, and the little girl got a picture of her grandma and put it on a table and put candles around it and put flowers around it, and then brought her mom to it and said, look, I built this so that we can remember grandma. She lives because she's in our memory and in our heart. And the mom wrote to me and took a picture of it and sent it to me and just said, like, thank you for bringing this home to me. Like, thank you for having your daughter celebrate my mother. And it was just a beautiful, like, that's culture, right? Like, I'm not pretending to be Mexican American. I told them, like, I'm learning too from our co-teacher, Senora Rufo. She's our instructional assistant. She's born and raised in Mexico. We got to see her family's altar. I didn't tell the kids to go home and build an altar, but that little girl, like, that's what she went home and did. So I think finding ways to help kids see that culture is not this foreign thing, but that every culture deals with things like death or with food or with celebrations or with adolescence, maturity differently, right? And there are different customs associated with those, and then inviting them to ask questions and learn about it.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh, I'm geeking out right now. So with your 10 years of experience at, with the little guys, with the AP Spanish, what advice would you give to like a first year, fresh out of college, maybe starting student teaching world language educator? Like, what would you say?
So I might have like hashtag unpopular opinion with this. My advice is to love your students and to show them that from the get-go. That does not mean you let people walk all over you, because I feel like the advice that I got when I started teaching was don't smile till Christmas, or like, you look really young, like make sure they know, like you got to hold the line, you're the boss, you got to have control, you have to have classroom management. And for me, it was about walking in and forming relationships with all my students. And like that's my advice to new teachers, your kids will respect you and they will want to learn from you and they will want to do their best from you if they feel like no matter what, they have your love and support. And so that's my advice at whatever level, whether it's 5 years old or 18 years old or into college, just to form a relationship, to show love, care, and support. And like we were just talking about with language learning, there's so many inhibitions. There's so much anxiety related to being wrong and not knowing how to express oneself. If we can just somehow create a connection, I think it lowers the affective filter and it makes language learning a lot more effective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I know you said, hashtag unpopular opinion, but I feel like that's the advice that everyone would give if they took enough time to think about it. I think like when we're talking to especially beginning teachers, we know that there are so many hurdles. And even though we know that we can never prepare them, like experience is that thing that you don't have until just after you need it.
Right.
So like we want so badly to give them the experience that we have to make it a little bit easier, but like you're going to try and you're going to fail. And the only thing that's going to make it better is that relationship. So absolutely. I feel like it's hashtag unpopular, but really everybody's thinking it subconsciously. It's just that we don't all say it.
Yeah, agreed.
So speaking of that, like effective filter, what strategies do you like, what's in your toolbox that you go to for like helping your students gain proficiency in the target language, whether that's with your little guys now or in high school, or maybe you found some strategies that work really well for both? Like what are your go-tos? What do you normally reach for?
Yeah. So I would say this would be probably more for my high school kids, not my little kids, because my little kids, I know it sounds strange, they don't super always realize they're even learning another language. Like they're just going to school, right? And their class just happens to be in Spanish. They're not like aware of like, oh, she's speaking to me in this and she's trying to develop my proficiency and she's trying to, But with my high schoolers, I would say what came into my toolbox in the last couple of years was through an alternate evaluation program. So our district does, instead of getting observed X amount of times, you can try and design this project and get it approved by your supervisor, and then you can conduct research, and then you can meet with your supervisor and talk about your data that you're collecting, and then you can share out what you've learned. And so I did a series of years on metacognition and reflection.
Wow.
And I saw that now, if I'm honest, it was a lot of work on our part as a teacher, right? Like it was something that I had to learn into, right? Because it wasn't something that I knew how to do or learned a lot about in my undergrad or my grad school. And I had a lot of generous people really help me along the way, but really helping my students be intentional about stopping and reflecting on what they've produced, whether it was written production or oral production, or stopping after a role play or an interpersonal and having them think through what they did, and then look at the like a proficiency rubric and say, like, okay, was I speaking mostly in sentences, connected sentences, paragraphs, or paragraphs that were connected and coherent? Okay, was I using vocabulary that was basic, and did I repeat the same words? Did I try and use multiple words to express, multiple shades of vocabulary to describe one idea? Really having them look through the proficiency rubrics. And it took me a long time to learn how to do, and I'm still learning how to do it. But I saw the gains really, really grow. I saw really make an impact. I saw my kids say, I noticed afterwards, I thought I always spoke in connected sentences, but I was really only having one or two sentences at a time. I saw the light bulb go off. And being able to go back through that data, and Google Classroom was really helpful, or whatever platform another teacher would use, but to be able to say, hey, I noticed that too, that's so cool. Next time you do an interpersonal, what's a goal you want to have for yourself? Oh, I'd really like to try and use transition statements to connect my sentences. And just being able to let the kids make that realization and set their own goals, and then support them. And then in doing that, it was inherently differentiated, right? Because my kids that were just trying to get a sentence together were like, oh, I was kind of just using the phrases we memorized. I wasn't really creating with the language. To my kids that were like, oh, it was so cool. I felt like I was able to ask open-ended questions of my partner, and next time I'd really like to. So it's a great tool, just this idea of reflecting on your own language production, asking questions, and setting goals. And I just really saw that drive proficiency.
That's so cool. Ashley, I'm so glad that you're going to be on the board so that we can continue, all of New Jersey can just pick your brain about all of these cool things that you've tried and figured out, and you can share with us. This is going to be so cool.
Well, I'm excited for it, but lots of things I haven't figured out. I still have a boy who poops himself regularly in kindergarten. So if anybody has any advice for that, I would love it. Because I just want him to tell me he has to go to the bathroom first.
I mean, in really any language, right? We'll take it.
I was like, dude, just tell me. We can assign, anything. Just tell me you have to go to the bathroom. I'll take you.
That's amazing. So, and again, you talked about both your little guys, how do current topics, as far as language proficiency, how is the same thing kind of true with the split between high school and kindergarten, where your little guys aren't always aware that they're absorbing a culture, whereas it's more explicit in a high school kind of setting?
For the current events, I think the little ones, they just bring it up naturally when I create space for it. So when I ask, tell me what you're excited about, right? Some kids will say, I'm really excited to watch March Madness, or sorry, it didn't happen. But they just bring up, not that March Madness is necessarily a current event, but when you invite, right, kids to share what they're happy about, what they're sad about, what they're nervous about,
right.
You let them bring ideas into the classroom, and then you work with what they give you. I think at the high school, I was definitely much more intentional. But at the high school, the cool thing was, if you're teaching with thematic units, I feel like you're always allowing current events to come in, because I think through my Spanish 3 honors curriculum, one of our second unit was stress, right? So we would talk about, what are you stressed about? What makes you nervous? What are you worried about? And they would talk about current events because they're 16, they're 15, and that's relevant to them. Our third unit was stereotypes, tolerance, and diversity. And there's always something going on about promoting diversity or a need for greater tolerance in today's world or an issue of discrimination. And the kids would bring that in because, we would invite that. We would say, when you think of discrimination, what do you think about, right? And they would say, well, for instance, when X political candidate was talking, they said, or I saw recently on the news that, and so I think when you have thematic units, even I'm thinking like my Spanish one, like the healthy lifestyle, right? Like I feel like most languages have like eating right or taking care of yourself or a healthy life unit. With that, you're able to bring in, okay, like why is hand washing important? What's going on right now with, right? So like, I think when you have a thematic unit and you invite broad questions, kids bring things to that at whatever level you're teaching.
Yeah, that's really perspicacious of you, which is my favorite word, by the way.
What does it mean?
So it's like a fancy way of saying perceptive. It just makes me,
I love it.
Perspicacious. It makes me feel very fancy when I use it. So yeah, feel free to steal it. So, like going back to when you were talking about the advice you would give to a first year teacher and like, as long as you like show love and support to your students, you're going to build that relationship. What does that look like in like things that you do and structures you set to create a positive classroom culture?
Yeah. I mean, I think this goes back to what all teachers know to do, right? Like everybody kind of agrees. And I think I sat, as an adult student, I sat through classes on the first week or second week where they're like, let's develop norms. And you're like, oh my God, okay, yes, we're gonna treat each other nicely, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. But when I think about it, I think being explicit and co-developing kind of like a classroom mantra or a classroom like way of being, I think is really helpful. I also think less is more from the teacher, which again might be #unpopular opinion. Like I would start my Spanish 3, my AP class, and just say like, hey, my thing is in here we speak the target language, and in here we're kind to each other. What else do you think, right? So like I would lay that as like, this is what I bring. Like I bring to this classroom, we're gonna speak in the target language, and we're gonna be kind. And what else do you, like, what questions do you have about how we're going to run this classroom? Or what questions do you have, what ideas do you have about how we should structure our classroom? And just let them bring things in. Let them ask about phones or devices. Let them ask about, right? Because I'll keep it as, like, so, they ask about a device and say, well, is it kind to be on a device while I'm talking and not looking at me? No. Okay, cool, right? So, like, you can have this genuine conversation that allows them to bring up issues. So it's not us, like, imposing kind of in this really almost like, I don't want to say imperialistic, but this dictatorial way, right? And instead this like, hey, let's just be rational about this, even at 5, right? Like I'll stop a kid and say like, I noticed you're not looking at me when I'm talking to you. It would make me feel better if we could look at each other so we know how each other's feeling, right? Because we have to look at each other to know what our feelings are like, and then the 5-year-old will look at me, right? So like if we can just have this mutual understanding, I think it really helps.
Yeah, that's amazing. Less is more. That's our new hashtag. No more unpopular opinion. Less is more. That's what we're going with. So how have you found that there's been a need for advocating for language learning in your community? And have you gotten the chance to, take a role in that? Or is it something that you're looking forward to doing in the future?
So I would say that I'm blessed to work in a community that's really, really, really supportive of language learning. It's funny because I was reading something for a colleague and they said, well, blah, 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 this is in English because at home when you speak English, and I just paused and I was thinking, wow, that's something I never say because in the homes of the families that I teach, I don't know that I could look up the demographics, but I would say less than half speak English as their primary language at home. English is a language that many of them speak, but they speak a myriad of home languages, right? So like, mom might come from a family that speaks Gujarati and dad might come from a family that speaks Tamil, but together they speak Hindi, and then they like speak that with the kids, but also English, and then they come to my class and they're speaking Spanish. And so that's something that I have brought up even as we're so last year was the pilot of our dual language immersion program, and this is the first year that the program is up and running. We have a kindergarten and a first grade class in Mandarin and in Spanish. And I often I try to not sound like haughty or like I'm correcting a person, but they'll say, oh, like it's so great that your kids are bilingual. And I always say, yeah, multilingual. Yeah, isn't that great? Because my kids are not just bilingual. They're trilingual. They're truly multilingual. They operate or float in and out of many languages in a day, which was not how I grew up. I'm a Jersey girl born and raised. My parents only spoke English. My parents still speak no other language. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I grew up in a home that it was only English. My high school, all my friends just spoke English. And where I teach, I'm blessed to teach in a community where there's lots of languages. There's great support for languages. Our program, our cap is at 50 because 25 5-year-olds in one class is already like, good Lord, sweet Jesus, like very difficult. And so we have 25 in the morning, 25 in the afternoon. We're capped at 50 and we're full. We were full last year, we're full this year because there's a lot of people interested. So I advocate in ways where I say like, oh, multilingual, right? Like I'm constantly promoting this idea of our kids speak lots of languages, they float in and out of languages, they're multicultural. But I'm learning that there's a great need for dual language immersion advocacy. I think there's a lot of misconceptions I've even encountered, and I had told my high schoolers before I left, like they knew that I was going to move down and teach kindergarten, which they thought was hysterical. They were like, what, are we basically 5-year-olds? Do you think we're good training? Yeah, kind of, Your 18-year-olds that are in the spring that have gotten into college, sort of, yeah, you're reverting to 5. I was just joking with them. But I lost my train of thought. Oh, right. So like as I would tell people, like I'm going down to teach this, they would say, people still will say like, well, I don't get it. Why do they have to learn in Spanish? I'm like, well, they don't have to learn in Spanish. They want to learn in Spanish, and it's amazing. Well, how are they going to understand the math, or how are they going to take the standardized test if they're learning math in Spanish? Well, it's transferable. The concepts are going to be planted in Spanish, and as their fluency grows in both languages and as their critical thinking skills develop, they're going to be able to do in the same way that any of us who speak multiple languages would never say like, oh, well, I can cook in English, but I can't cook in Spanish. Like, of course you can. Like, it's a transferable. Right. You might not have all the vocabulary words to do it at in the same rate. Like people will ask like, are you fluent in Spanish? And I'll say like, well, I speak Spanish. I wouldn't want my car to break down and have to explain to a mechanic. To be fair, and not to draw on stereotypes, I can't really explain what's wrong with my car in English very well either. Yeah, but I could do it in English better than I could do it in Spanish because I've never really had to talk about car parts in great detail in the target language.
Right.
But all that to say, yes, I'm excited about doing more advocacy for dual language immersion programs and for helping people to understand that you can learn academic content in any language at any age. And I'm fighting off that, well, is it just a program for the gifted? No, it is a program for everyone. Anyone can learn a language, right? Like our program is open to students in special education. I have students that are being classified that are in my classes. It's not just a tool for something to pad your resume for the elite students. It's for everyone. And in fact, language immersion programs have been shown to close what some would call the achievement gap. This idea that students from different SES backgrounds or from different demographics learn differently, or not necessarily learn differently, but score differently on testing. And so the dual language immersion program really set everybody, whether you had an amazing preschool experience or you had no preschool or you were homeschooled through preschool, wherever you come from, you walk in the first day and I speak to you in Spanish and you're like, whoa, what? Right, so it's a great equalizer for all students.
Yeah, that's so cool. And that's such an interesting, I know that in the part of New Jersey where I am, it's a pretty high socioeconomic status and pretty homogeneous, homogeneous, that's the word, grouping. So not a ton of diversity, and it would seem that would be the place where, something like dual language immersion to pad resumes would come in. But it's so cool because the grassroots efforts for starting programs like dual language immersion are really so much more successful in places where people already value speaking multiple languages, because they're like, I want my kid to go to school in Spanish. I know that they're going to be able to function in another language because I can do it, and I know, everyone in my community can do it. So it's such a cool, I think, dichotomy of everybody could see the benefit, but this is something that's really, people are like, yeah, let's do it. We'll figure it out as we go. Let's make these programs happen because we know that they're so important.
Yeah.
So, oh, that's amazing. So what, kind of changing gears a little bit, what has been your greatest classroom success? And feel free to, high school, kindergarten, both, like, time to brag a little bit, teacher of the year. What has been your greatest classroom success?
I like choke up thinking about it. Just to be honest, like watching the kids love the language, watching them use it purposely, watching my kiddos graduate and having them write to me or take pictures, or sometimes they call you and you're like, oh, you're definitely out partying or something. But like they're like, I'm in Madrid, and you just like it's just beautiful. I've had kids go on to major in Spanish or pick it up as a minor along with their nursing degree or along with their engineering degree. And these programs that are really structured, like you think about an engineering program is so well planned out for a student because they have to take so many classes, and that these kids push to be able to use their AP credit from high school and to take a few classes at the college level and to minor in it or to go study abroad. And it's just, that's the success, right? Like that's what we always wanted for them. We wanted for them to love it and to use it. And we were just talking about like padding resumes, right? And I always will push back against that idea. Our school district is very diverse. But it is quite wealthy, and there's a lot of this like, oh, well, I always would start my Spanish 1, Spanish 3, and AP classes. I taught some other levels too, but those are my wheelhouse. With, a question in the first week, like, why are you taking this course? Because it's an elective, and what do you want to get out of it? And a lot of kids would tell me in the beginning, like, oh, my parents said I can get paid more if I am bilingual, right? Or if I'm multilingual, or my parents said that I have a better chance of getting a job if, and I would stop them and I would just say, I'm not like generally to a person, but collectively, like speaking a language is a gift, right? It's a joy. It's not something that we use to get ahead. It's something we use to connect with other people, right? To build bridges, to help, to love. And I joke, I say, you might fall in love with someone that comes from a Latino or Latina family in the future. Like you're going to want to be able to talk to your in-laws. You might get a job offer and they'd say, yeah, it'd be great, but the office is in Buenos Aires, right? And you can say, I can go do that. I can make those connections. I can serve those people. I've learned about that culture. I want to keep learning about it. Send me, I'll go to that job. Right. And so, yes, on one hand, I totally understand the parents who are telling their children, like, oh, this is good for you for your future, makes you look good. That said, I try and reframe it to like, it's a gift, it's a joy, it's something we can use to make this world better. Learn a language.
That's so cool. Oh my gosh, I might have to add another hashtag. Learn a language. Okay, anyway. So what do you think the benefit is to, like, why would you recommend to a teacher to get involved in an organization like FLENJ? Like, what do you think it could offer them?
Yeah, I think teachers, it's hard because every culture of every building, every school building is different. And I've worked in one district, but in multiple schools in the district. And even as departments kind of change, as people retire, new people come in, there's always like a different vibe to the different groups. Sometimes they're really open and really collaborative, and that's great. But sometimes you get into like the egg crate, like go in my room, close my door, this is my practice, right? And there's not a lot of sharing going on. And I'm blessed to work with I'm going to just do a plug for like the world's best world language department ever on the face of the universe. Like, I mean, there is just sharing across languages, across levels. There's so much love in my department. But I've just heard from lots of people that feel kind of isolated and feel like they have no one to share with, no one to really like spark their ideas. And so an organization like FLENJ lets you network with other teachers and lets you be vulnerable, lets you say like, I really don't know how to go about X, or like my syllabus says I have to teach like, the preterite and imperfect in French, and I don't know how, or in Spanish, or I don't think German has the preterite and imperfect. Sorry, German. Right, but like, I don't know how to teach X, and it's in my syllabus. Like, how can I teach that from this perspective? Or how can I do comprehensible input? Or how do you use readers in your classroom? Or right, and so I think a network like FLENJ lets you come alongside with your questions and with your gifts and with your doubts, and just put it all out there and say, I could teach you this. I would really love to learn about this in a place where you might not have that in your department. Or you can do it as a department. I come to FLENJ events with people in my department, and it is just a joy, because then we come back and we say, like, let's tackle this together. Like, okay, we're going to learn how to use X, like Flipgrid. We all saw about Flipgrid. We're going to try, again, plugging. Sorry, I don't work for Flipgrid or anything. We're about these ideas, and we're like, we can make this work. Let's try it together. So I think it's about, yeah, they're great networking. FLENJ is a great networking source, and it's a great place to get help.
Yeah, I think that's so true too, because like, I think a lot of times we focus on the people who do feel isolated. You know, I love that, like the idea of the egg crate, where it's like, we're all technically in the same place, but we're not really interacting with each other ever. But it can be like, it's still so powerful when you're coming with all of your colleagues, because like, you know, you can, some of the best stories that I've ever heard are people who decided to take like a divide and conquer at the conferences, and they were like, okay, you're going to go to this session and you're going to go to this session, and we're all going to get back, and like between all of us we can pretty much attend the entire conference, and it's going to be great. You know, like it's like, even if you're not isolated, you can do that kind of thing and strengthen those bonds both within and outside of your department. Like, so speaking of being isolated, how has your like remote learning, have you guys started doing the online thing yet?
Yeah, so today is our third week.
Okay.
March 13th was our last day, and so we're 3 weeks in.
How's that going for you?
It's an adventure. I mean, teaching 5-year-olds all in the target language all day is a challenge. But then, you know, and I thought that was enough. Like, God really got me this year. Like, this was a year, you know. But then, like, surprise! Now you're gonna do it in Spanish online.
Right. So have you found any hacks or anything that has like worked for you in terms of anything, literally? Sanity, anything?
I can speak to like teaching littles in Spanish, I would, or in a different language, a language other than English, maybe in English too, I don't know. Songs were great, like songs that you have together as a class. They still want to come back together. They want to hear those songs you've been singing. They want to dance the silly dances you've been dancing, and it brings them joy. And it's because to a 5-year-old, or you know, anybody who's young, like they've probably FaceTimed or Skyped possibly with like grandparents or with relatives, but they've never done it with 25 other peers in the class and with a teacher, and they don't really know it. It's very awkward to all get on the screen for the first time, or they're just like completely silly and like making faces in the screen, and you're like, oh my God, please, like, let us all focus. So I think like a really great way to do that is to bring like one of your call and responses in, bring one of your songs in, bring one of your dances in. It's what everybody knows, and it kind of sets that tone of like, oh, it's like we're in school, but we're on the screen. But it's like we're gonna do school. And just, it's hard too, because we do lots and lots and lots of turn-in talks, right? Like, and we teach languages, right? So we're all about getting them to use and produce and interact and get feedback from another. And like that genuine feedback is what prompts the next exchange. And so that's really hard to do with 25 little faces on a screen, or if you're posting videos and then having them write, because you know, writing is a new skill for them, no less typing. That said, games like with 5-year-olds, I don't call it hangman. Like we actually draw a snowman, so like you get the snowman's body and the right instead of drawing a dead person hanging. That's not necessarily what your 5-year-old. But that's great because it gets them working with letters, and they get to guess. Each kid gets to type in or say a letter, right? And then it's spelling a mystery word, and it's engaging everyone, and it's fun. So just finding like little games, Pictionary, where you're drawing for them and having them guess, and you give the theme, like, okay, we're gonna do vocabulary based on food, and like I'm gonna draw food, and then you have to tell me what you think it is, right? So like just finding ways to play with them still online has been interesting. But I would say more broadly, the teachers in this virtual thing, like I'm just constantly reminding myself, like I need to have grace for myself. We need to have grace for ourselves. Like maybe back to that, like less is more, right? Like we are not going to be able to deliver the same exact type of instruction and create that same beautiful community. We can try, and it's good to try. It's good to pour our love and our heart and our energy into it. But I think in the end of the day, we just have to have grace for ourselves. Like this is a global pandemic. Right? Like this is like everyone needs to stop and just say like what's important, that you are healthy and happy, right? Like let's get to learning, but like are you okay?
Yeah.
right? Like, and just having space for people to share their emotions, and as teachers, for us to just be vulnerable in ways that are appropriate, but to just share and speak into our kids' lives and be able to say, like, I feel like that too, or yeah, I think that's really been hard for me too, right? So that they know they're not alone in their feelings, and just giving them that connection and that love and that support and that freedom to say, this is how I feel right now. So yeah. I would say grace to all teachers. We're doing a brand new thing, and kudos also, like, props to teachers who just, like, in a matter of hours, really, it was like Thursday night, we were told tomorrow's at half day, and then we will start online instruction, and it was like, go do what you know how to do, which is reinvent, and we did, right? Like, as teachers, we pulled it together collectively and did what's right for the kids. And I just think, like, so many props to teachers, especially in New Jersey.
Definitely. Ashley, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us tonight. I feel like I have so many sound bites that I want to go and like scribble down in my idea notebook before I forget them. So this has been amazing, and I think it's going to be a really great resource, just like a grounding thing for New Jersey teachers. And I'm glad they got the chance to meet you. And I'm really looking forward to working with you on the FLENJ board. All right. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you.